Now, Insulate Britain, arrests have been made. This after, as 39 in total now, after climate activists blocked Dover port, causing queues of vehicles attempting to cross the channel. Insulate Britain, which of course you'll remember by the chaos that they've caused on the M25 5 times in the last fortnight. They say that more than 40 people gathered around the Kent port, which is Europe's busiest ferry terminal, and now authorities are saying that any passengers should take extra time for their journeys. It started at 8:20, cleared by police 2 hours later. One lane of the A20 though remained blocked afterwards. 2 protesters sat on top of a tanker with their hands glued to their vehicle. In a moment we're going to talk to Insulate Britain, but I want to know from you whether you think this is a step too far, whether you think they've made their point now, or whether you think that what they are trying to achieve, the message they're trying to get across, is so serious that this is the kind of action that needs to be taken. Or are they actually becoming counterproductive when it comes to this? Are they actually now turning you off some of the demands that they're trying to make? They're actually making it worse for themselves. 0344 499 1000. Well, are we ready to go to... we are indeed. Let's now talk to Steve Gower, who is a spokesperson for Insulate Britain. Afternoon to you, Steve.
Afternoon to you, Aaron. Thank you for having me on today.
Oh, I'm not Aaron, I'm Cristo. Aaron was the person who was behind the scenes, working hard. Oh, you've given him his moment of glory now. He's thrilled to have been mentioned. I know. I try not to talk about him on air. Now, you are saying in the statement that you've released today that there would be vast numbers of skilled jobs, long-term energy cost savings. You would optimise infrastructure investment and reduce fuel poverty by having this retrofitting insulation system happening across the UK. So those are the benefits that you're citing. Haven't you made your point now? I mean, is inconveniencing people and making yourself actually public enemy number one around this issue? We get it now. Insulation. You want a retrofitting system. You think it's going to be beneficial. We've got the point. Why did you need to do what you're doing at Dover?
We need a statement from the government, a meaningful statement. This isn't something new. In 2001, the government of the day recognised that there was 50,000 people dying of fuel poverty then, and promised in a statement that they would insulate all the council and social housing properties in a 10-year project. That was 20 years ago. They recognised that 50,000 people were dying dying a year. Apologies.
Okay, so you haven't got what you wanted so far. And can you point me to the targeted action that you've taken regarding maybe blockading specific MPs' constituency offices? Have you made any arrangements ever in the past to protest in the Environment Secretary or the Secretary of State for Housing, for instance? Have you done any targeted protests at any of those locations?
Yeah, back in August, we personally sent a request for the retrofit and installation of insulation of all the social housing and council housing in the country. That was back in August. We sent that personally to them.
I understand that. That's sending a request. Did you target in the way in which you've targeted the Port of Dover or the motorway? Did you target any of those constituency offices of any specific MPs that have not fulfilled their promises, of the Environment Secretary at the time, either the most recent one or one previously in the last 20 years? Have you done any targeted action, glued yourself to the constituency office of the Housing Secretary, protested outside the Ministry of Housing, any of those sorts of actions before this?
There has been converses of what you call it. I apologise. Not vetoing, sending messages to the representatives of the official parties, and that's happened over not just our campaign, but many campaigns in the past. What I'm trying to say is that history will tell us that if you do what you call it,
ignore.
No, not ignore. Apologies, but petitions. Go and see your MP. Them things don't work. Years ago, we all remember the million.
Did you do a petition so that it could be debated in the House?
I personally didn't, no, but I know a number of people that have.
Did Insulate Britain ever do that? Did Insulate Britain ever do one of the change.org petitions or anything like that to try and get this debated in the House of Commons?
What I'm saying to you is that information has been passed on previously to this campaign to the relevant MPs and constituents of areas. Personally, myself, I've been in fuel poverty for the last 3 years, and I've lived on food banks for the last similar amount of time, 3 years myself, after becoming homeless. This has been going on for 20 years, as I mentioned before. The government as well.
But I'm sure you will understand that anyone listening to this would say, right, well, this has been going on, and there are certain people in power, in government, that could resolve this. But rather than take targeted action towards them, what you've chosen to do, and some might say to make a name for yourself, some might say just to annoy people, is you've chosen to walk into the middle of motorways, which is not only dangerous, but also stops people being able to get to work, and actually could therefore then perpetuate the very kind of poverty that you're saying that you are complaining about. You've also decided to blockade the port of Dover, which again is going to stop people being able to go about their lives. And my question to you is, when did you get from writing a letter you didn't get a response to, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, to starting to take that kind of action? Because many people would probably support you if you were to actually go and protest at for the Minister of Housing. Many people would support you if you went and protested when it comes to the Environment Secretary. Why did you choose to do that instead?
This is a crisis that's happening today. We need action from 20 years ago, but nothing has happened in 20 years.
But you've done nothing but write a letter. You've done nothing but write letters in the last 20 years.
The statistics are there that people are dying from fuel poverty. That's a fact. Okay, enough is enough. I myself am living in fuel poverty. I am one of 7 million individuals currently living in fuel poverty. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. This is a crisis. And to sort the crisis out, we need a leader to man up, take hold of the situation, and actually do something that's meaningful for everyone, or most people, 7 million individuals in this country.
All right. What we're going to do, we're going to keep you over the break, if that's all right, because you actually have got some really interesting statistics here, which I think is people will be interested to hear about. The amount we spend, the amount of people, the amount of money that people lose by this not being done, which I actually think is quite valuable for people to hear. So if we can hold on to you, if that's all right, when we come back, we'll talk to you a little bit more. But you're saying that in your statement that 8,500 lives were lost because of cold and leaky homes is the tip of the iceberg, and that the NHS has to spend $2.5 billion each year from the ill health associated with poor housing, not necessarily poorly insulated housing, but poor housing. Is that right?
That's right, yeah, but I got to be honest, Cristo, and I'm currently unemployed, and I have been for about 4 years, but I am a volunteer advocate for the homeless and threatened homeless in my city. And the figures that we've had in the past, this is not to do, I don't personally trust the figures that come out of the government's mouth. I don't know how you feel, but they told us pre-COVID that there was 17 individuals on the homeless list in our city. And then 3 months later, when COVID came, they filled 4 hotels.
Sure.
So
I mean, can I be honest with you, Steve? And I hope you don't mind me being brutally honest with you, but I'm going to read you some of the tweets I've been getting, because people are sympathetic to your position, but many people have been saying, well, you seem to have spent a lot of time over the last few years with Insulate Britain and worrying about insulation, whereas wouldn't have your situation been better if you'd actually perhaps looked a bit harder for a job?
I'm currently volunteering. I think that the work I'm doing is scrutinising what should be done by the council.
But then isn't that one of the reasons, though, that you might then therefore be in fuel poverty, and therefore then, so you're volunteering and then having to protest because you're in fuel poverty, but if you're spending less time volunteering and protesting, would you be in fuel poverty?
I understand what you're trying to say. What I'm trying to say to you is that I'm looking to where I am at the moment. I don't want to talk about myself personally because this is a bigger issue.
Well, in fairness, you brought up your personal situation, not me.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, but I was just talking about the figures that we've just mentioned, 8,500. I think they're pretty conservative, to be honest. Like I said, in 2001, they mentioned that was from the British Medical Journal in 2001, that there were 50,000 people dying a year in fuel poverty. I live in fuel poverty, okay? I don't want to be unemployed, and I intend to be employed as soon as possible. But what the scenario is at the moment is I am not working. I'm living in a private tenant, one-bedroom flat, sharing it with my son, okay? And I still can't afford to live or pay for my fuel.
Well, with respect, stop volunteering and protesting and maybe get a job.
The people I talk to, the people I advocate for, are in poverty-stricken mental health issues.
Sure.
That is something, another issue that I am personally, as a social issue, nothing to do with Insulate Britain.
All right.
The reason I'm with Insulate Britain, if I may continue, is the fact that I see day in, day out, people without fuel. I mean, gas supplies for up to 7 years without a gas supply. I see it firsthand. I feel hard done by. There are lots of people even worse off than me. And lo and behold, there's 7 million people today living in fuel poverty.
But okay, but you know that insulation isn't always the solution to that. We had a call from an insulation fitter, actually, and Tony, and he says that places that have got cladding, which is a form of insulation, other places that have other kinds of insulation, much of it's having to be removed because it actually perpetuates mould growing in some of these properties. So therefore, you're advocating for a solution that for some places is actually making it worse.
I talk to individuals, small businesses that can actually produce, small businesses that is, produce zero carbon buildings today, okay? They are a little bit more expensive than today's houses, but then today's houses aren't fit for purpose.
So how would we pay for all of that?
For what?
For new zero carbon houses.
How would we pay for them?
Yeah.
Well, would you put a value on a price of your grandmother or your daughter or your granddaughter or grandson?
No, but I'd put a value on the price of taxpayers' money and how we can afford all of this stuff. And I would also...
With respect, we've just come through a COVID pandemic, and there seems to be money floating around that wasn't there 2 or 3 years ago. So I don't think money is the issue. I think this is a humanitarian issue on a massive scale. I think the finance, we'll find the money. If we need the money, we should find the money. If we want to save our lives...
Respectfully, it would be my money. Respectfully, it would be the money of the person I'm looking for through in the glass. It would be the money of the person who's on the knobs and muttons. It would be the money of Aaron, the guy that you called me at first. It would be their money, our money.
I agree. Okay, what I'm saying is that when I was working in 2001 and I was paying tax, the government said that they would insulate all the houses then. Sure. So I've paid for something that hasn't been installed. So what I'm saying is that's why we want...
You haven't paid for anything since, though. I've been paying for you to live since.
Okay, all right then. All I'll say to that question with regards to my personal circumstance is that with the people that I advocate for that are homeless, they may well not be on here today to speak for themselves. and live a life, hopefully, that they'll hopefully enjoy.
Okay, and I think that's
I don't want to go
valuable
through
work,
that.
but what's that
Not
got
the
to
effort.
do with the time you're
Yeah.
spending on Insulate Britain? And I want to get back to the
Exactly.
point that you are
Yes,
annoying
let's get back to
people.
the
All
point.
you're doing is irritating people by closing off Dover. You've never once tried to actually target any. All you've done is write letters to any of the ministers who actually have the control on this. And I would put it to you that you'd have far more support from the public and get far further with your cause if you actually targeted constituency offices or government departments that look after this stuff, rather than gluing yourselves to tankers, gluing yourselves to the M25, or the footage we saw this week. We haven't got time, I don't think, to show it now, of your representatives storming off television shows. Why are you doing that and annoying people and actually making people not able to, those people respectfully that aren't volunteering and do have jobs, what you're doing is stopping them being able to go about their lives?
We could write petitions, and we have written petitions and what have you in the past for
You
other
couldn't name
campaigns.
one. You couldn't name a petition that you'd done.
On my personal note, yeah, definitely.
Well, what petitions have Insulate Britain done? Sorry if I misunderstood you. What petitions have Insulate Britain done?
Yeah, what I'm saying is in the past, petitions haven't worked, haven't reacted. You wouldn't have me on this show now today unless what the actions that we've done previously in the last 2 weeks. I don't want to be out on a road, believe me.
Well, then go to an MP's office.
But I don't want to freeze to death this winter, or get in debt this winter, which would probably be the case. Which has happened over the last 2 or 3 years. And the individuals that I'll go back to where I was before, that I advocate for, they're in a worse scenario than me, okay? A lot worse. Some of them are street homeless.
I get it, but I don't understand why you want then, if you are so concerned with people who end up in poverty, do you understand the lunacy that people see from this, that you're worried about people being in poverty, and the way in which you solve that is to stop people being able to get to work? I mean, you do understand why people think that that's so counterproductive and moronic.
We are informing the public that we have, as a community, have individuals that are worse off than ourselves. That's me included, personally. All right, I'm struggling, but I'm not struggling as others. 7 million. I keep stating this. There are 7 million people that are going to suffer this winter, and without our action recently, that wouldn't even be on the agenda. We got a COP meeting in October. We haven't, but obviously the Prime Minister has coming up soon. That needs to be on the agenda. Stand up, be a man, and give us something that will help the communities, our families, and our sons and daughters, and even our grandmothers.
All right, Steve Gower, really appreciate you taking the time to take us through some of those figures and to talk us through some of this action. Insulate Britain spokesperson. Does that do anything to convince you as to the merits of what they're doing? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call, and we'll be back with our political panel to react to that and some of the other stories today here on Talk Radio. Tell you what else is available now, our political panel. Olivia Utley is the assistant comment editor at The Telegraph. Mike Buckley, journalist and campaigner. Absolutely lovely to speak to you both. Afternoon to you.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hi. So, Insulate Britain, we just spoke to a spokesperson from there about the latest action, which was blockading Dover. And what I was confused by was that obviously Steve Gower, who we spoke to, was extremely worried about fuel poverty, but hasn't had a job in 20 years. I mean, is it fair to make that connection with someone when they bring up their personal circumstances themselves? I'll start with you, Mike.
So I didn't see the clip. So you're saying that this guy hadn't had a job for 20 years, but was concerned about fuel poverty in the UK broadly. Is that right?
Yes, exactly that. That he spends his time sort of volunteering for homeless people, advocating for Insulate Britain, and that one of the things that has really got him so into all of this is because for the last 7 years he's been in fuel poverty himself. But he hasn't had a job since 2001. And I couldn't help but ask him, well, surely the reason you're in fuel poverty is because you are spending all your time volunteering and working for Insulate Britain.
Well, I think the question to him as an individual is a perfectly fair one, and if he's healthy and of sound mind, then there's no reason why he couldn't go and get a job. But that doesn't take away the fact that the systemic problem exists. We have the highest energy prices, but for households in Europe at the moment, and they're going to rise further. And we're going to break through the cap, which is meant to protect people from price rises. At least once, if not twice, by spring next year. That's at the same time, of course, as the government's national insurance rise and the £20 cut in universal credit, which will push 700,000 people into poverty, including 350,000 children. So we are looking at a huge problem, and we're looking at that's, of course, as well in the context where Brexit is leading to food price rises of 4 or 5%. And people are going to be facing the choice: do I feed my family? Do I put the heating on? Do I wear more jumpers? What do I do? How am I going to make ends meet? And actually, for us, it's a conversation, right? I presume all of three of us on this conversation will be able to go away from this and still put the heating on when we need to, and still go down the supermarket and buy some food. So for us, this is a hypothetical. But for millions of people in Britain, this is not hypothetical. And the fact that this guy is not the ideal spokesperson isn't relevant, actually.
But the thing I can't get my head around, Mike, and Olivia, I'll come to you in just a moment, but I cannot get my head around is that one of the things that they are protesting passionately is people potentially ending up in poverty. And they couldn't give me one example of when they had protested a constituency office of an MP who has broken their promises on this. They couldn't give me one example of when they've targeted the Environment Secretary or the housing ministers about any of this stuff. And so they're worrying about people going into poverty. They're not actually inconveniencing the people that make decisions. They're inconveniencing people who need to get to work, who ultimately then might end up in poverty because they can't work. Do you see how counterproductive that is?
Sorry, is that to me or
to Mike? But I mean, you can
That's to me.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know I do. I agree with you wholeheartedly, and honestly, it drives me mad. This issue drives me mad because I regularly speak to people who simply don't seem to know how our democracy works. You're right, blockading the M25, stopping people getting to work, barricading people's workplaces or tube lines or bus routes or whatever, it doesn't change anything. And by and large, probably MPs and Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, etc., don't know that that's happening. Maybe don't even care that that's happening, depending on your point of view of, what you think of those particular people.
All right.
But you're right. I always speak to people and I say, have you spoken to your MP? And people go, well, no, because people don't think of speaking to their MP. But all of us can get a surgery with our MP if we want to.
Sorry, that's just moronic. I mean, Olivia, I don't know whether you agree that, look, it's a very worthy cause, but the methods are abhorrent.
I mean, the methods are obviously abhorrent. It's not at all coincidence that quite a lot of the people who are on these roads have never had jobs. They don't understand how a working person works. The people who they're stopping are the sort of ordinary working class people who are driving to work, who they're trying to save. The other thing I don't really understand is if Extinction Rebellion got its way, a lot more people would be in fuel poverty. Quite a lot of the fuel shortages that we have at the moment is because the government has been too idealistic about its net zero targets and has done away with all sorts of our energy supplies because they're not green enough, and is relying far too heavily on renewables, which would be great. That's wonderful, but the renewables don't yet work properly. We saw a couple of weeks ago we had to fire up a coal station because we didn't have enough wind power, and that's why we're having an energy crisis. In a large part, it's because we're relying far too much on foreign energy because we're closing down all of our energy supplies in the UK while relying too heavily on renewables. So I think it's a bit rich for these people to come on air and say, oh, I'm worried about people getting into fuel poverty. It's your policies that are getting them there.
Mike, what do you say to that?
Well, I would, it was very well put, Olivia, but I would disagree with everything you've said. In fact, if the government had spent the last 11 years while they've been in power investing in renewable energy instead of just letting us become dependent on foreign gas, then things would have been fine. We don't have enough gas in the North Sea. We have to import a lot of gas. Now there's a problem with that. If we'd actually built the capacity in tidal or in wind or in solar.
But the wind energy doesn't work. That's the problem. We've had a sunny September.
Wind energy, you're right. Wind energy comes and goes. Tidal is there all the time, as is solar. So had they actually invested in this and invested in battery capacity to store electricity and but nowhere near enough.
But we've never heard. I don't think there's been a day that's gone by that I haven't heard about investment in ecosystems, in eco methods, in getting all of these internal combustion cars off the road, getting us all recycling, net zero by certain years. I mean,
just because. Yeah, but just because they're talking about it doesn't mean that it's happening, does it? I mean, if you've noticed, this government has regularly announces things and then re-announces them a few weeks later because they think it sounds nice, doesn't mean that they're doing it.
Okay, Olivia?
But the government has actually, it is investing a lot. When you look at the figures, the government is investing an awful lot in renewable energy. The government policy is to get all British homes insulated. These protesters are protesting for government policy. It's so pointless and so bizarre. And now they're worrying about fuel poverty. That is literally their problem.
The insulation is a great example. I mean, we had the Green Homes Grant scheme last year, and I think about 3 people in the country actually managed to get hold of a Green Homes Grant because the hoops you had to jump through were utterly ludicrous. And then the government pulled the scheme halfway through. So they didn't actually spend any money or get any homes insulated. It was, well, I think it was incompetence as much as anything else, but it was also a propaganda exercise. If they're going to do it, they're actually going to have to spend the money. They're going to have to train the workers. They're going to have to invest in the materials. Same with heating our homes. They keep saying, oh, you must buy a heat pump. You can't buy a heat pump, or if you can, it costs about 10 grand, and a boiler, a gas boiler, which is still more reliable, costs far less. They have to invest in these things if we're going to be able to use them. Same with internal combustion engines in cars. But then they have to invest our
taxpayer money in them. And as we already know, taxes are already massively on the rise. So they hike up our taxes again. And then, oh, look, you've got more people in fuel poverty.
Whilst the very people who are protesting it aren't working. So, as I pointed out to this gentleman that we spoke to, it's not his money that's going to be doing this. It's my money. It's your money. It's the person behind the glass here's money. It's not his money.
I think we can all recognise... I think we can all recognise that these processes are not the ideal spokespeople at all, on any of this, and we can all disagree with their tactics. That doesn't mean that the issues that they're talking about are irrelevant or untrue.
No, of course. We all agree the issues they're talking about.
Yes, but never before have I wanted to buy a 3-litre SUV more and rip out my loft insulation. I tell you that for nothing. Now,
don't do it.
On to more serious matters, because the debate has come up again. And that is about Sabina Nessa, who is, of course, this poor young woman who was murdered, body found last Saturday. It's brought once again to attention the dilemma of how to keep women safe when advice towards women becomes almost victim blaming, when telling men that they're the problem doesn't mean that you're actually trying to demonise all men, whether you're even allowed to say that nowadays, because of course many people say that even by suggesting you're demonising men, you're not solving the problem. And of course, solving the problem should be the most important thing. Olivia, what do you say about that? How can we have the debate about keeping women safe in a way that doesn't demonise either side and actually solve the problem?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it just feels as though we're kind of talking too much, and a murder like this happens, and for a few days people are sort of genuinely horrified and outraged, and it's terrible. And then it seems that people sort of get on their political hobby horse, and whatever they believe is the crux of the problem, they will start bashing that drum and start arguing with each other. And actually, it's really quite simple. There's a structural element of it, which is we need to be teaching boys in schools. It doesn't have to be done in a demonizing men way at all, but there is clearly a sort of structural issue. Someone was making a comparison, I can't remember who it was, but with the way drink driving has been pretty much stamped out in this country. Our parents' generation, my parents' generation anyway, would just do it without thinking, and my generation just wouldn't dream of it. And that was a very good example of a very good government public health campaign. And so something like that would be great. Also, it sounds a bit sort of dog whistly, but tougher policing is a big part of it. It does seem kind of insane that that the police are sort of chasing up all sorts of hate crimes on Twitter, etc. And there are women who are reporting rape to the police and not being taken seriously. And then the justice system is in a bit of a mess. And it seems it's not surprising that women don't want to come forward with their claims, because we know how unlikely it is that a rapist or a sexual abuser will actually end up in prison. So there's sort of 3 prongs to it, and everyone basically knows that that's what needs to be done. But we just seem to talk about it a lot. And I think this is a case of the government sort of saying the right things. And when a story like this breaks, it's tragic and the government comes out and says everything right, but do they actually follow through? And I think probably, government incompetence is a part of it.
Okay, Mike, just very briefly, if you could give me your thoughts on that.
Well, I wish I was more of an expert on this. I do know that criminal justice has been, criminally underfunded for a very long time, and that has a whole host of impacts in our society, which again, those of us on this call are probably insulated from, but actually millions of people are not. And I don't know the figures offhand, but I do know that it's very, very rare for a rape to be reported and actually go to court and then have the perpetrator prosecuted. That's vanishingly rare, and it shouldn't be at all, because it's a horrific crime and it should be treated as a horrific crime, and people who do that should be held to account. And I don't know what needs to change. I think more money needs to go into the system, but clearly it isn't just that. Clearly somebody somewhere in the government and elsewhere in the legal system actually needs to do something about that side of things. But the other side of things is what sorts of behaviour are tolerated in our society. And I think, again, I'm no expert, but I doubt that somebody who kills a woman, I doubt that is their first act of violence, whether physical or verbal, towards a member of the opposite sex. So
no, I get it. I think many people have mirrored that it's whatever conversations we have to start a lot sooner about this. Listen, really good to talk to you both. Mike Buckley, journalist campaigner, Olivia Utley, assistant comment editor at The Telegraph. We'll be back. You've been calling in your droves. We'll be back for some of your calls on this in just a moment here on Talk Radio. Let's talk to David in Suffolk. Hey, David.
Hi, Cristo. How are you?
Fine, thank you. So what did you make of our Insulate Britain guest there?
Oh, my blood just boiled. We spoke about energy surveys. I spoke to you last winter, actually, because we just made sure that your flat had a proper EPC rating on it. All properties that are sold, rented out, shall we say legitimately, have to have a minimum energy standard. In the rental sector, it's got to be a minimum of a band E rating. And the local authorities and the government have been insulating within an inch of their lives all of their social housing. We don't need to go much further than Grenfell Tower, because that was obviously all retro insulated, and then it caught fire. But literally across the country, in my neck of the woods in Suffolk, if you rent a property out which is substandard, it is not adequately insulated, you get a £4,000 fine.
Oh yeah, and obviously, and you're actually quite right, in as much as, because I've owned local authority housing before. I lived in a local authority flat for a while, an X1, and I remember getting a huge bill because they came and insisted that they had to change all the windows, they had to change all the doors, and so you're quite right. A lot of the work is being done, and it's difficult not to see some of these people as just wanting to create chaos.
Well, there's a huge demand for retrofit energy assessors at the moment. And I haven't done it because I'm busy enough, but I'm sure our friend Steve, there's two very good job opportunities for him. He can either go and train to be a retrofit energy assessor or an HCV driver. But
absolutely. Either of those sound good at the moment. Listen, David, got to go, but thank you. That's David in Suffolk. Coming up in the next hour, more of your calls on this. You're calling in your droves. Plus...